Welcome to this episode of the Strong Kind podcast. This episode is with Laura Norris. Laura is a running coach. She's from Colorado, not originally, but she lives there now. She has an extensive knowledge of running and run training. She has a master's of science in exercise science, and she's got a ton of awesome knowledge and expertise in the field of exercise and running training. Had a really great conversation with Laura. She's got a really balanced approach to thinking about run training, and we got into some good conversation oriented around humans and how we often self-sabotage, or how the fitness industry has made things kind of overly complicated for people. It was a great conversation. Really enjoyed talking to Laura, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. Thanks for being here. All right, Laura. So I've just kind of creeped on your Instagram. Like, I found you through Instagram, which is really cool. But you're in Colorado. You got a stocking cap on, which I have a stocking cap on. I have a stocking cap on most of the time. Just tell me a little bit about, have you always been from Colorado? What brought you to Colorado? And
Yeah. So I am not a native. I am probably too soft for the winters here. I'll admit right now it's like 12 degrees and it's been like that for a long time. It's cold, but I'm in the Boulder area and I am originally from the Midwest. I grew up in Missouri, lived for a good time, college, and afterwards in Indiana, Northwest Indiana, essentially Chicago area. And then I spent a large chunk of time in Seattle. So I've kind of lived all over mountain states and Midwest. And for now, we're living in Colorado. What brought us here was a combination of wanting to live back in a mountain state while being closer to our family in the Midwest, relatively speaking.
Nice. Sorry. There, I just had I was closing a tab, and
Yeah.
as you were talking, a Rage Against the Machine song was going on my other tab. So I apologize. I heard all that.
Oh, yeah.
Where were you where were you at in Missouri? We're just starting off with all sorts of
Yeah.
answers.
St. Louis area.
Okay, my wife's from the St. Louis area. So
Oh, too
um
funny.
yeah, so that the running joke in the St. Louis area is like, what high school did you go to? Do you
Yes.
remember that?
Yeah, I still remember that, which is the running joke. So I went to Ursuline Academy, one of the private all girls
Okay.
STEM focused schools.
Super cool. Which takes me to getting into kind of just why I follow you. So I'm a physical therapist and strength coach, just to like enlighten you about my background. But like your tagline is like, let's science the shit out of this run. Which I just want to know, like, where, so we could say what stemmed that, but where does this come from, and what are your goals with being on social media? What are you out there to do?
Yeah, so the origin of my tagline, it actually comes, it's inspired by The Martian by Andy Weir, which is a great book and also a really wonderful movie, one of my husband's and my favorite movies. And there's one line in the book where he's stranded on Mars and he's essentially like, the only way forward is to science the shit out of this. And he's like planting potatoes on Mars
Yeah.
and stuff. And a few years back when I was starting my master's degree in applied exercise science, I was like, I really have been taking my coaching and my website in a direction of more research-based training for a few years. And I want to make that clear to my audience while also having kind of a not too serious about itself vibe. I want it to be science, but I want it to be fun and balanced. And so when I was rebranding my website in 21, my husband and I were tossing back and forth some taglines, and he came up with that idea looking at the copy of The Martian sitting on our bookshelf.
Martian is a great book. It's such
so
a good
good.
read. Andy Weir also had a really interesting writing process for that book, which was really cool. So no, I love that. And I kind of now that you said that, like it did, as soon as you started saying The Martian, it just brought back all of that. Like Abe, that movie's amazing too.
Yes.
But him just, figuring out how to survive and how his reasoning, it was awesome throughout in the engineering. I wish like I was that smart in a lot of ways. It's like, at least he's portrayed to be. It's also a fictional story, right? But let's talk about running the science of running. What got you into running first and foremost?
What got me into running goes back more years than I would like to admit. Just because, I think as a millennial, we sometimes like, gosh, no, I'm not that old. So I started running when I started undergraduate in 2008. And I had done some fitness stuff in high school. Essentially, my high school was like, if you didn't take dance, you had to take what they called exercise technology classes. And in those classes, we had to learn to lift weights, how to do timed mile runs, all that stuff. And I actually enjoyed those classes. And so I started doing like weightlifting a bit on my own. And then by the time I got to college, I was like, well, this gym has all these treadmills. I want to start running too. It was something I'd wanted to do for a while, but my parents' neighborhood didn't have like great sidewalks or a very runnable area. So I
Mm-hmm.
started running right when I started college, and there was all these treadmills right across from my dorm there. And I really enjoyed it from the start. I started doing it gradually more and more, like did it 3 days a week, then 4 days a week, then built into 5 days a week. And by the time I finished my undergraduate, I went to then my first master's degree and started using running a lot as an outlet during my first master's degree. I did not love the environment I was in during that degree. So, like, I had a treadmill in my apartment that I got for myself as a gift, super cheap. And I would just run on it to have some form of catharsis.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny because I've told this story like a few times. I'll probably always tell this story, but uh, to make the soccer team in high school, you had to run a certain time on like a 3 mile or a 5 mile run, and one of my brothers was like, "You're never gonna run that," and like so my freshman year, I didn't make that time. You can still play soccer, but you just don't like you can't make like the varsity squad. And in the middle of the winter, I drove to the school, and I'm like, because soccer starts in spring break basically in Iowa, and I wanted to get faster, so I just went and I just ran 3 miles. I just did it, and then what it became was like running was just this way for me to just after school or at 7 o'clock at night, I just like put in, which is why I was listening. Oh, it's funny because I was listening to Rage. I would just put in music and just
Yeah.
freaking go. And I think it becomes that a lot for a lot of people, and which is awesome. But I want to ask you this: where does that take a lot of people in their running journey to some extent? I don't know if I'm leading you there, or if we kind of come to the same conclusion, or what that looks like. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a common place where a lot of people start. And then usually running is a gateway drug to different sports. And so a lot of people start running kind of like we did. And it becomes then, well, I did this. Can I go further? Can I go faster? And usually, next thing you know, you're signing up for a marathon or a half marathon or something. And kind of broadening the sport from something that's just very, go out and run as feels good to the day to bring it into something that's more structured and intentional and rigorous in some senses.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it definitely was a gateway to a lot of other things. And I still like I've gotten back into running in the past year basically. Like I took a significant amount of time where I was just like lifting, and it's also funny how polarizing the fitness and the health space can be sometimes. And it's like a lot of this stuff you can kind of just figure out what the heck you want to do, and as long as you're doing it relatively intelligently, you can do whatever you want, right? um what are the things, what are you looking to do, how are you looking to help runners, or how are you looking to help people who want to get into running? Like, what's your overarching mission?
Yeah, my overarching mission is to help them do it in a smart way that is also going to encourage sustainability and long-term participation in the sport. With that comes an element of enjoyment, because if we don't enjoy something, we're not going to stick with it, and a lot of runners will start out maybe running, put on music and run hard because that feels good. Then they sign up for a race and they run everything hard. And initially that works for them and they stick with that till they're burnt out or injured. And then they're unhappy with where they are. So my goal is to take research-based and science-backed methods, because those are guardrails and guideposts throughout something that involves the human body like running does,
Mm-hmm.
and communicate that in a way that people can train in a way that's smart and sustainable. And, hopefully that leads them to long-term participation in the sport. Hopefully that leads them to enjoying the sport. And for a lot of people, it leads them to accomplishing things that they maybe previously thought they could not have.
I love it. It's you bring up the enjoyment piece, and that's something that just like comes up over and over again when I talk to coaches and clinicians and stuff. Like, because there's so many different methods, but like helping people enjoy the process is so key. What do you enjoy about running now that maybe you're a little bit further into your running career than when you first started out?
Oh, that's a really good question. Honestly, I enjoy the variety that can be present in it through different training seasons, through even the day-to-day stuff, where it's like some days you go out there and it's just this easy, light run. You're enjoying the scenery around you. Some days you go out there and you push yourself hard and it's tough, but you get stronger in the process. And some days you go long and you see a bunch of things. I really enjoy that variety throughout versus things that are more monotonous and repetitive. And I know running can be monotonous and repetitive, but I like the variety, and I like how that can flex through seasons of life. So I've done seasons of life where I'm super intense on marathon training. I've done seasons of life where maybe I'm running a bit less, trying to lift a bit more, or we're doing family things like hiking every weekend, running still there. It just kind of flexes and ebbs and flows through those seasons of life.
So because you're a mom, correct?
Yes, mom of one.
Mom of one. How old is your child?
She is 5 and she is a force of nature.
A force of nature.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
She has a lot of energy. I joke to people, I'm like, maybe don't run your whole entire pregnancy, because I ran the day up until she was born. I was like, don't do that because your kid's gonna come out and already be fit. And then by the
Yeah.
time you're 5, they're like literally last night she had to count to 100 for school. So I had her do it while spinning in circles because it was the only thing we could do to get out the energy after 2 recesses at school and after playing outside in the snow.
Yeah. See, but like, and I know you probably prefer that to
Yes.
a lot of other things, but it is like it. So, I mean, I want to talk a little bit about this because, like, I have a 12-week-old. My wife just had our
Oh,
first child.
congrats.
Thank you. Yeah. So, and so my wife is so we're both physical therapists. My wife does a lot of pre and post. Well, my wife is a pelvic floor physical therapist. She's a physical therapist, but um, she did a pretty darn good job of riding the waves of pregnancy and staying active. And this is not meant to be anything against anybody. Pregnancy's hard. I don't no idea what
Mhm.
pregnancy's like, right? But like people who can maintain a level of physical activity throughout their pregnancy, just it seems like they recover quicker. And that, like, I don't know, like, but the kid, and I think there is a lot of research
Yeah.
supporting it, so I can probably
Yes.
I can make this conjecture. I'm just feel like as a man, I feel like
Yeah.
I'm mansplaining stuff sometimes, but
You're
like
not.
um but yeah, it's like, man, it's just he's happy. And
Yeah.
I can't attribute all of that to the fact that my wife was very physically fit throughout pregnancy and whatnot, but it is crazy. Like it, the environment we create via what we do is so powerful, right?
It is. It is. And like I feel like with my daughter, it was really good for her health. And I mean, who's to say nurture versus nature versus actions you take during pregnancy? But she is so smart. It scares us sometimes.
Yeah.
And I mean, my husband's a mechanical engineer with his PE. So I'm like,
Yeah.
she definitely got it from him. But anyway,
Yeah.
it is amazing because like, you do see this research that being active during pregnancy has very favorable outcomes for the child's intelligence, for the child's health, and like the recovery part. I had a C-section that had to be done quickly and urgently because of a breech position, and I went into labor. And the recovery was way quicker than I thought it would be. And I really think it was because of good fitness going in.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, my wife at 6 to 7 weeks, we were walking pretty shortly after in very low amounts, right? And then 6-ish weeks, she went and did like some core, like a core
Mhm.
workout, and just because like that is a big thing. Like
Yeah.
the human body, the female body can change. It is meant to adapt immensely over the 9 months of pregnancy, and it takes legit time to come
Mhm.
back. But also just being strong, capable throughout helps a ton with that process. And then she's back. We're 12 weeks, and she's been going and lifting in our garage, and like not what she was doing maybe at her best or anything like that, but she's definitely feeling like herself more, and we attribute a lot of that to staying active and doing the thing right. So when it comes to, just to pivot a little bit here,
Mhm.
when it comes to running and evidence-based, science-based, strategies and tactics for running, a lot of this is tricky because it's like so much of it is individual goal dependent, and there's preferences that matter. But if you were just gonna like make a blanket statement about what you see runners doing that maybe holds them back, or some things that you see, what are those things?
That's a great question. Also, I hope your wife continues to recover smoothly. That's so awesome. She's doing
Yeah,
so well. I just wanted to make sure I said that.
no, yeah,
But so one of the biggest mistakes I see runners make is they conflate harder is better all the time.
yeah,
When really in running is an aerobic sport that also needs a decent amount of volume. And you can't pull all those levers all the time. And so a lot of runners, especially if they come from like maybe a more anaerobic based sport, or if they came from something like swimming or cycling that doesn't have that impact, they have a tendency to go too hard all the time. And that actually stunts adaptation. But then a
mm-hmm.
lot of them think, well, I'm not improving, so I need to do more harder.
Yeah,
And then it is this vicious cycle, as really it's a volume based sport with a high biomechanical demand. And with that comes a lot of easy volume, a lot of load management, and a lot of, as I best heard it once described, leaving room for cream, making sure that you're not overreaching. You want to be able to stack those training weeks.
yeah. It's funny because yes, like, so you take very aerobic and oriented training, like training for running, and then like I coach a lot of different people. Like I coach kind of people who are want to be or who are power lifters, who would identify as power lifters. I coach people who are runners that want to get into strength training, and kind of everything in between to some
Mhm.
extent, right? But the same problem in just different forms happens on the other end of the spectrum. People who want to train for like a lot of strength, right? It's like they don't play the long game, right?
Mhm.
And so yeah, it's while it's different adaptations, there's also developing capacities that can help you across the board, right? And being patient, like, because also like strength is a hard quality to cultivate in a different, like in almost a similar but different way as aerobic capacity, right?
Mhm.
um
Yes.
People double down on, hey, I'm going to train 90% here over and over again, without developing any other capacity, right? And it's like, who, yeah, like getting people to see that is tricky though too.
It is. It is. And that makes me think of another error that people, sorry, I tapped on the table. I realize that's bad for
No,
recording.
you're good.
Um, that makes me think of another common error that runners make, and that is not having enough periodization or variety in their training season. You were
Yeah.
just saying with power lifters, they'll do everything at say 90% rep max over and over. We see runners be like, well, I want to get faster at the marathon, so I'm going to only train for marathons. I'm going to only train marathon pace workouts. And they end up handicapping themselves within a year or so because they're not working on other vital aspects of fitness. They get this thing where they're raising their, let's just say they're raising their LT1, their aerobic threshold, but they're not raising their VO2 max or their, whatever we want to call it, maximum lactate steady state, critical velocity, whatever. And so they end up with the ceiling crowding where they
Mm-hmm.
can't get faster in the marathon because they have no more room to keep growing. As if they, raise their attic up, they would have more room.
Yeah. It's well, you're right. There's so many like ways, or there's so many variables that you can
Mhm.
pull on, right? And a lot of times you just like doing the thing and you're like, well, I just got to do the thing harder, right? And And that doesn't mean that doing the thing hard isn't a big component of still getting good at whatever your sport is, right? But yeah, like you mentioned, like some form of variation in the calendar, and whether you want to call it periodization, or if whether you want to call it like concurrent training, where like somebody
Yeah.
who runs, right, it's like, yeah, you still need to do, like, we need to manage your volume on your runs, and you need to do some strength training, and you need to do some strides or something like that, right? Like adding that type of stuff in. No, I'm on you 100%. You mentioned load management, which is probably like my overarching philosophy in life, is like, how do we manage the load? And like, what is the load? What would you say is the load that people need to learn to manage?
Yeah. I think with running training specifically, what really helps athletes in understanding load management is thinking about two principles. One, that load includes volume and intensity, and that training load needs to be specific to your event, but you still need to balance your volume and intensity. I think athletes too easily get wrapped up in like a number, like, oh, I got to run 50 miles a week, not thinking about the other aspects within that load, particularly intensity or the type of intensity. And then the other key principle that athletes need to think about with load management is that it takes stress plus rest to have adaptation.
Yeah.
And so that rest has to be a variable within your load management that you cannot neglect.
Yeah, that's a good point. What's your thoughts? I've just had this pop in my brain. What's your thoughts on active recovery? Is active recovery a thing, or is it just a language thing? I kind of have doubled down on like, stop. So here's what I think. I'm a proponent of relative rest. If you like to move and it makes you feel good, great. But just realize that if you go do a 20-minute bike ride where it's like RPE 3, super chill, it's probably not having much of a training effect on you. But if you're calling like a weird like CrossFit Metcon like active recovery, quote unquote, but it actually was challenging to you, that's not recovery in any way, shape, or form. So what are your thoughts? Challenge me or agree with me? What do you think?
I'm going to agree with you. I think the term active recovery is used as an excuse for an athlete's unwillingness to actually recover properly. So I'll see a lot of runners be like, well, I just did a 3-mile recovery run. It was active recovery. My heart rate didn't get that high, but you aren't just a set of lungs and heart. You are a nervous system, and you are a muscular system, and you have bones. And those things all need to recover from the load also. And even a quote unquote 30-minute recovery run doesn't, like, it's still loading your bones and your muscles.
Yeah.
And it's still taxing your nervous system.
Yeah. It's like you saying it. And I mean, I think about this stuff constantly, but you just even saying it in that simple way of like, it's still low, like, because how I think about it is, it's like, it's still activity. And what if that threshold, I'm assuming you're somewhat familiar with like the envelope of function model, right? Where it's like, if it's a disruptor, if it's above a certain threshold, it's disrupting homeostasis. Right. Well, what does that mean? Well, you're right. Like, maybe it's not disrupting your lungs very much. Your lungs can handle it, but it's 10,000 extra steps on your leg, on your knee, or on your joints during a week, right? And so that's a really good way of framing it. I'm probably going to definitely use that in some content in the near future, because it's like easy to just be like, it's just, yeah, it's, and I think what people really have, and I had to have a hard time doing this, I like to work. When I go do stuff, it calms it gives me focus, which calms me down, right? But the tricky part about that with any training is that, well, are you moving towards the outcome you say you want, or are you doing the work to work? And neither one of those is necessarily bad, but you have to know, if you're sabotaging your progress and you say you want to progress, then you're hindering yourself, right?
Correct. And I think for a lot of athletes, it comes from a place of insecurity, that there is always this unknown variable when we go and pursue a big goal. Like, let's say you're wanting to qualify for Boston, which is a very common goal nowadays. A lot of athletes are scared about undertaking that goal because there is an element of uncertainty, and their insecurity drives them to think more work is going to be better. So I shouldn't rest. I should just keep working towards this goal. When if they really stepped back and just trusted the process and embraced that element of uncertainty, they'd be better off, because they would then take those rest days. And with that, like, I'm a big fan of walking on rest days. Like, if an athlete wants that movement and they like their routine, walking is wonderfully health promoting without having all that varied system stress that running does.
Yeah, yeah. I would, and like, just going back to what I was like, walking is not really a homeostatic disruptor for most,
Yeah.
unless you're accumulating 20 to 30,000 steps or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, that's a really good point. Where does that insecurity and uncertainty come from in our day and age?
Oh, I think social media plays a significant role. And like social media is a double-edged sword because it's been very beneficial for fostering this big running boom we're in. And I think it's a great way to offer education for athletes, to provide them with community and connection. So that's super beneficial. But then with that comes this comparison trap and let me make sure I phrase this politely, the misinformed novices who think that the way they do it is the only way to do it. So maybe someone's pretty new to the sport and they had success doing 70 miles a week within their first year. They're going to tell everyone that that's the one way to train.
Yeah,
And people who are trying to be receptive to experts will see that and misunderstand it.
yeah. Were you a misinformed beginner at one point in time? I know I was.
Oh, yes, I was very, I mean, I was, when I began, like I mentioned, it was 2008. And so I think the main sources were like magazines, like
Yeah,
Runner's World, Women's Health, and stuff. And I remember like a few years into running, reading in like Runner's World or something that like about conversation pace. And I was like, what is this? I've never heard of this before. And I've been running for like 3 or 4 years,
yeah,
reading stuff on it.
yeah. It's really, you're right. Well, and I think it's, nobody really escapes the Dunning-Kruger effect unless you're
Exactly.
really like, unless you're like, oh, man, I read two books that are from people who are neuroscientists in the past month, and they are completely juxtaposed positioned about like uh kind of free, what you would call free will. And it's
Mhm.
like, damn, these people who both have PhDs and are both like seeking to try to understand the human condition come out with a very different conclusion, right? And like, that's the hard part about science and understanding like just the makeup of all this stuff. And like, both of those people agree on the foundational principles of like neurons firing together, wire together, right? But they have different interpretations of this overall thing. And where I'm going with this is like, you can get good at running if you figure out the principles you need to like, like hold to, right?
Mhm.
And find what you enjoy in that process, right? So if you're gonna lay out some principles that you want to, and I think you do a very good job of promoting this type of stuff. What are the principles that you mentioned load management, but what else? Like, what are the principles that you're trying to teach and educate on and help people understand so that they can run sustainably?
Yes. So I think one of the important principles I try to promote is, like I said earlier, training that is balanced enough that you can stack it consistently. Because if
Okay.
you push too hard and then you're injured or you're burnt out, you're actually not going to improve. A lot of times that means finding a mileage that maybe some weeks feels too easy, but overall you can stack it over time.
Yep.
Finding a training load that usually, I'm not going to say like 80/20 is best because there's a lot of nuance to that and it
Yeah.
neglects a lot of training intensity distributions, but doing a majority of your runs easy, whether that's 70% or 90%. Um, Another principle I promote is using specificity deliberately, yet not all the time. So again, if we go back to our idea of the marathoners who do a lot of marathons, doing marathon pace sometimes, but doing harder workouts other times, maybe further away from your race or stuff. Having this varied training so that you don't leave one aspect of your fitness behind. Another principle I really deeply believe in is fueling for the work required. And that a lot of times involves fueling within your runs. A lot of runners neglect that. But then that's also going in with adequate substrate available, recovery nutrition, avoiding the trap of low energy availability, since that happens unintentionally to many runners due to a whole host of reasons. And then finally, like another principle is that running is important, but it shouldn't be the only way you move your body. Resistance training is valuable for performance reasons, yes, but also just we can't neglect things like bone mineral density and lean muscle mass for athlete health or even well-being as we age. And then for a lot of runners, it helps them a lot mentally to have cross training, or maybe they like to hike, or maybe they like to ski, something that's not running where they can still move their bodies and maybe have an off season where they aren't running as much, but they're out skiing. And that brings holistic balance to the training calendar.
Yeah. No, those are all I'm gonna go through these and just vehemently agree. Like stacking wins, the best
Yeah.
ability in training is availability, right? And
Mm.
um it's hard because you know you have to challenge yourself. But honestly, most of the like a lot of times the challenge is just showing up and doing the workout, right?
Yes.
Like, oh my God, there's a buck that just walked across my backyard. Wasn't very big, but anyway, that just was like holy moly. Which is I'm in Iowa, so it's not like crazy, but I mean it is pretty common here. So, but stacking wins because I say this at the beginning of every year. I say it a lot of times with like new clients who are maybe consistency is a goal. I'm like, hey, 3 times a week for 52
Mm-hmm.
or for 3 times a week for 50 weeks is 150 workouts a week, a year, right? Whereas like if you tell me what your pattern was and it's like you fall off for 6 weeks after you go hard for a month or something like that, or you get injured, and it's like, well, you're only stacking, 80 workouts a year or
Mm-hmm.
100 workouts a year, and that like there's, it's good that you're doing that, but just think of how good you are with gonna get with those extra, like with that increased amount of just time doing the thing, right? What are like this is a hard question, but like easy. How do you help people figure out what easy looks like?
Oh, I love this question because right now on social media, there's a heavily skewed message towards heart rate training, which can work for some people, but it's a lot trickier than they make it seem. So, how I often break down easy running for my athletes is first off with the message that you can't, as long as your biomechanics aren't absolutely falling apart, which happens at a much slower pace than a lot of people think, you can't go too easy. So, kind of breaking athletes out of this notion that like they should constantly slightly push the envelope on their easy days, thinking that's better, of just being like, these days are accumulating volume with minimal fatigue and framing it like that. Then we look at things such as one of the most reliable metrics that is free to use and doesn't take field tests or much calibration is the talk test. If an athlete can speak conversationally, so that's a few sentences without having to gasp for breath, they are working below their first lactate threshold, aerobic threshold, whatever we want to call it. Speech comes with ease is one way I've seen it in research studies. And that I found has helped a lot of athletes. I've even had some of my more like very type A athletes actually record voice notes for me
Yeah.
and send them to me. They'll be like, am I doing the talk test right? Here's a
Yeah.
voice note. And it's actually really helpful. So that's very reliable. If an athlete does want to use heart rate, it can be helpful. However, we have some considerations around validity and reliability of both formulas and monitors. So I highly encourage athletes who want to do that to use either a chest strap or one of the like optical upper arm bands. Those are usually more valid at higher intensities. The optical wrist-based ones, the research shows that they are valid at low intensities, as in like walking or rest. But once you get into running, especially with the jostling, there's less validity in the measurements, more noise. So they don't work as reliably. So if an athlete wants to use heart rate, we need to use the right measurement tools. And then usually I field test my athletes to try to get a sense of where their lactate threshold, MLSS or critical velocity, whatever we want to scientifically call it, heart rate is. And once we have that field tested, we can set zones on estimating their easy pace more reliably than maximum heart rate can be. That's a lot of work. So I usually encourage athletes to default to something like the talk test unless they're really struggling to use that.
Yeah. That it's funny because I went and a couple weeks ago, one of my past clients, great client, love her. She started working with me for strength training in conjunction with her running, and we did a trail run, and I don't think I'd ran 5 miles yet, and we ran and we were talking the whole time, and it was enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that she definitely helped me hold back from pushing too hard, and I'm like, and I know what you're talking about, like, because that, yeah, if the goal is volume and like aerobic training, then if you're it's not always the place. Yeah, like where my background in running was just like go push hard.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right, or run some sprints, which again, sprints are fun, but like there wasn't a whole lot of rhyme or reason to what I was doing. It was just kind of pick a few things and go after it. All right, so let's talk about, do you when you coach people, how do you assess, like, initial kind of fitness, or the initial starting point, and then like what are the, like, I guess I just keep using KPIs, like what are the performance indicators that people are moving in the right direction that you try to track with people?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when an athlete starts with me, I have them fill out a lengthy questionnaire. Like I actually had one athlete be like, wow, I never filled something out like this with a coach before, but I really want to get a sense of their training age, their all-time performance, their recent performance and stuff. Honestly, I would say like 80% of people who come to me have done a race relatively recently. So
Mm-hmm.
that gives us a benchmark already. Now, if they haven't raced in a while, I do make them do a benchmark usually starting out, and I often base that benchmark on their goals and their training age. So like for an example, someone comes to me and they're pretty novice athlete. I'm not going to have them do a 30-minute threshold test off the bat. Like that would be pretty demanding for them. Maybe we'll do a mile time trial or something. Um, so a variety of different tests I use early on, and then we might repeat those tests, or if they're racing frequently enough, we might just use races as that. I have a variety of benchmark workouts I use throughout a training build when maybe a max test would not be appropriate, but we want to measure their progress. And then, honestly, a big thing I look at is I use Final Surge, and there's like this little part on it where athletes can mark how they felt. And I pay a lot of attention to that. And I often will ask my athletes, how are things feeling? Because one big mark of improvement is like a better subjective tolerance of a training
Yeah,
load.
yeah, it's pretty, that's a, I think just, it's crazy because people always move their goalposts, but
Yeah.
hey, look how much better your easy, like look how much your easy performance or your moderate performance is than it was 3 months ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like if you keep raising your floor, your ceiling will go up, right? But like what people do is, we just habituate to
Yeah.
everything, right? Whereas if you can be like, oh, look how much you've done, in the past like 3 to 6 months, and it's like this is really what matters, because there's going to be tons and tons of fluctuation in in a week or in a month, and as long as like we're not just continuously, the trajectory is not continuously down, and we can say
Mm-hmm.
it's upward, we're moving in the right direction, depending on also the season and the goals of the person, right? I love that. All right, Strava, good, bad, neutral. What do you think of Strava? What is your opinion on comparisonitis in the running world?
Yeah. So first off, is I hate Strava's AI. Like I'm gonna put that out there because maybe someone will hear it, but it's so annoying as a coach because the AI will be like, "Excellent job on your anaerobic performance today," and it encourages this push, push, push. But aside from my feelings on AI, honestly, I think Strava can be a wonderful place to connect, but I think for a lot of runners, there is too much comparison trap out there. And the way sometimes I frame it to my athletes who are like, oh, I saw on Strava that, all these other people are running 60 miles a week and I'm only running 50, is I have a few 305 to 310 marathoners, and some of them are running 40 to 45 miles a week, and some of them are running 65 to 70 miles a week at their peak, which is a huge distribution of training
Yeah,
volumes.
yeah.
And Strava, I think if you tend to fall into the comparison trap on Strava, I really do encourage athletes to step away from it because technology is only as good as it serves us.
If
If
we can
it's
apply
serving you
it.
poorly, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's the thing. It's, with wearable tech and everything, it's like just people don't know how to interpret the data
Mhm.
in such a way that it just often just ends up being a thorn in their side, right? Which it can be tricky. Also, just like we weren't. I don't think we were meant to monitor our freaking heart rate and all this
No.
stuff constantly. I don't. I think it just blends a lot of unfortunate neuroticism or
Yes.
anxiety, right? Um, yeah, I'm with you. I think you make excellent points. And AI is really cool, but it's again, you have to learn to interpret what the heck this things mean, right? And it always, for me, I think coaching, the reason that I have worked with coaches, and the reason that I think coaching is awesome is if what we're trying to do, coaching is about like empowering people, and like helping people. I look at it like kind of helping people holistically, even though like my
Mhm.
my niche is maybe strength. My niche is just training. Like I just call it training. I think training is really valuable for people, right? Where like I'm not a run specific coach for some people, but and I think some people, the people who are really looking for run specific coaching would seek you out as a compared to
Mhm.
me, which is totally fine, right? Um, but like helping people almost detach a little bit from like uh it's all about the goal to, hey, let's look at the process and let's look at what is going to help you as a human being, you know, thrive, is probably going to make you a better runner too, right? Or a better lifter, or just feel better in general, right? But people don't always think about it that way, maybe until we kind of help them think about it that way.
Absolutely. Like I think a lot of with a coach, it's a lot of like detaching athletes from the outcome because goals matter and big
Yeah.
performances should be celebrated. But like sometimes, just to give like an example, like I had one athlete at a race recently. She was doing awesome on her goal pace. And then someone tripped and fell in front of her, tripped her
Mm,
with them. Her day was thrown off. She understandably slowed down. Shit happens on race day, out of your
yeah.
control sometimes. And so you can't get too hung up on these results. You just have to embrace the process. And I think a lot actually of Aristotle, when I think of this, is Aristotle is really big on these habits we create, that what we repeatedly do is who we are.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of like running training, is that like being a runner is repeatedly doing this stuff and creating this habit within this journey on an upward trajectory. And you don't want to lose sight of that habituation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of tricky too, because like uh it's so I just always go back and forth between like it's the well, so I actually was talking to somebody about all or nothing. Like humans are like waves, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm all in, and then oh shit, that got hard, so I'm all out, right? And it's like, well, no, like you just have to be okay, like with just that all inness is that you've built up enough like energy to like be like, I need to change or I want to do this, right? That all out is that you tried to overhaul everything at once, and like your life just doesn't work like that, right? And so we want to just start to make these little tweaks in the direction of our goals, right? But like that also typically, like that's not how anybody's marketing. Like that's not how any major corporation's
Mhm.
marketing works, right? Like our marketing is very much educational and like, hey, change is going to require adaptation, takes time, right? Training intelligently is ultimately beneficial, but it's not always sexy, right? Like um but when it comes to like, you're 100% right with the Stoics knew what was up 2000 years
Yeah.
ago. Let's just put it that way, right?
Yeah.
Like we are what we repeatedly do, and often that like it's just this like cultivating these habits that I also just think it's like, hey, we're all going to have bad habits, but the more good habits you can cultivate and stack, just like the more wins you're going to stack, the better, the more you're just going to become the person that, that is going to run well. The
Mhm.
tricky
Yeah.
thing is people, I have one client, I love her, but she's just all in on powerlifting. And then we kind of got her to like de-identify with, I'm only a powerlifter, but then she almost became a little apathetic. And it's like, you can still love to do this thing.
Yeah.
You can still have a bunch of energy and put it into it, and without like like detaching from the performance at all. You can care about your performance without like identifying, you can identify with the good, right? Without like
Mhm.
taking it too personal when shit doesn't go your way, right? But that's
Yeah.
kind of hard.
I mean, but that's almost like Aristotle's happy medium within this whole virtue ethics, habituation
Yes.
ethics that he has, is that like there's extremes on both ends and both ends are negative. And it's finding that medium that works well for you. And that's circling back, like that's a lot of running is being like, we're trying to find this happy medium for you that keeps you in your identity as a runner without letting it take over your life. You don't want to run so much that you're never seeing your family and you're exhausted all the time and you're falling asleep on your computer at work. But we also don't want to be totally apathetic where you're not moving your body healthily.
Yes, 100%. And it's we just get into our things, right?
Mm-hmm.
We get into
Yeah.
our things and we're like, I got to do this, or otherwise I'm failing, or XYZ, right? And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, how many people have gotten into running, they've committed to marathon running, and then like it's a total disruptor to actually what they want in their life, which is to feel good and
Yeah.
enjoy time with their family. And doesn't mean you can't be a marathon runner. It just means like, hey, lengthen the time that
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to get good at it, right? Commit to building up the capacity where you don't have to, go super hard in a 14 or 16 week period of time. And it like, but people don't really enjoy that. Like I got this race coming up
Yeah.
in 16 weeks where it's like, well, if you built up the capacity over a few years, then your training for that specific event doesn't have to be quite as intense, right? Doesn't mean it's not
Exactly.
hard. No, this has been really good. What are your to wrap up here?
Mm-hmm.
What are your do you mind if I ask how old you are?
Yeah. Go for it.
How old are you?
35.
35. All right, I'm 36. What I keep telling people I'm 36. I was like, I'm 36 and 35 are not old, but I feel like we also have to be like, I'm 36. Like, because
My kid called me old, and I was like, girl, I am the same age as Taylor Swift. I am not old.
yeah, exactly. Right. But it's still funny because that narrative of I'm getting
Mhm.
too old for this starts to creep into people in
Yeah.
their 30s. Right. And it's like, um, no, you're not old. You just got hit with life. Like the stresses of actually, making money and living well and forming community and being maybe a parent or working, all that stuff is also load that we have to manage, right? And it can leave you feeling crummy just like anything else, which is often why we turn to running or lifting or training to help. But then it kind of can become a vicious cycle because you run yourself ragged with the other thing too, right?
Yep.
What are your goals for your running career for the rest of your life? That's a big question, but give me a few things that you
That's a
think
really good question. So, like speaking of like life gets more busy in your 30s, because I had my kid when I was 30. And I've been with my business for 10 years now, but it really started booming around that same time. So my goal is I want to someday get back to where I was in my late 20s. Like in my late 20s, my husband and I were living in Seattle, which is just this wonderful place for running. And there's all these road races all the time. And I was fast. I had BQ'd a couple times. I was routinely placing in my age group. And so it's like someday I just want to get back to that. And I'm getting closer. It's been a process over a few years, but like I'm getting back there. um if I had to put like a big lifetime goal out there, and I think this might surprise some people because we don't think about 5Ks as a goal, but like a sub 25K is this tantalizing goal. I've run 20:59 on a hilly course as my best, and so that I think would be this like big lifetime goal. But then mostly I want to keep running for like decades. Like I have some athletes in their 60s who are absolutely crushing it, and I want to be them when I grow up.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think well, it's funny because I just I've gotten back into I try to run for either distance or time 1 to 2 times a week. I'm also playing basketball more. I'm playing tennis.
Nice.
I lift on a regular basis. I lift four-ish times a week type of thing. I've gotten into sprinting. So like I'm very much doing kind of holistic concurrent training. Sprinting is freaking fun. And I was a slow kid. I was a kid that was told that you're slow, and which was dumb at the time. I look back and those were jerks of coaches. But what I will say is like 5Ks, I think a lot of people, it's like there's nothing wrong with getting good at those. Like, everybody kind of looks at the marathon as like the thing that a runner has to do, but like I just think you can run 5Ks, you can run marathons and be really athletic, but I think for adults, like running 5Ks pretty fast is a pretty good test of athleticism as you get older, and I think that's really cool. So also miles, like I mean, I ran my first hard mile in like 10 years last summer, and it like kicked the crap out of me. And
Oh, it's so hard. Yeah.
I used to run like a 5:15-ish mile when I was in high school but I forgot the pain of how bad it was, right? And like 5:15 is not that amazing, but for a high school soccer player, it's pretty
It's pretty
decent.
good. Yeah.
But I mean, I think I ran a 6:20 and I was like dying, and I'm like, oh man, you used to go a lot harder than this. But I think so much of it is just finding there are no rules, right? And I think that's what people get bogged down in. It's like, oh, can I do that? Like, if you want to, go after it. So
Yeah.
I appreciate your take. Do you think what does 80-year-old Laura, what do you hope she's doing?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, first off, I hope like the world is still around. It feels sometimes like really cold here or really hot. I hope that 80-year-old Laura is, I don't know, I have a hard time conceptually like full retirement ever because I love what I do. I love working with people.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can't do it at this level all your life. But I don't know. I just want to be hanging out with my husband and my grandkids and my daughter. Only grandkids if she chooses to have a kid. That is undue pressure to put on her. And probably you've probably heard my dog in the background this whole time. I'd love to still have a rescue pet, and probably, my ideal retirement spot would be somewhere on the West Coast where there's no weather changes at all. It's the same weather year round.
Yeah, I did an internship in Santa Barbara when I was in finishing physical therapy school, and it's pretty wild how it's 70 degrees and sunny there, and when it is, there's a cloud in the sky, people notice or whatever. And also, I don't know, Washington's not really like that. There's weather in Washington, but I do love Washington State too. It's such a great.
I love Washington State so much. Like, I think, I don't know, we dream of moving back there someday because, like I've said, I'm just too soft for it out here in Colorado. And that's as a former Midwesterner.
Yeah. Do you ski?
We skied a lot when we lived in Seattle. But Seattle skiing is worlds different than Colorado skiing. Like, the powder is different. It's actually easier powder out here. But like, Washington skiing is very, like, there's no tourist. It's very just laid back, and these like not very busy resorts. And it's honestly, we haven't skied out here in part because my daughter's still young, but it's very intimidating to like go to these big busy resorts and try to start skiing again, knowing that the skill will come back, but I'm not a super skilled skier right now. I was better like 7 years ago when we did it a lot.
Yeah. Skiing's just fun. It's just one of those things where when you're doing it, you're in it. Like, running's kind of like that. Like, that's why I like lifting too, is when you're doing it, you're all in it. Hope, most of the time. So yeah, super cool. No, I love your page. I love your messaging. I'm glad that business is going well. It's crazy. I will say this too. If you're a coach, get through the first couple of years of trying to fit into a couple of years sounds like a long time for people, but like, if you can put out content and stay on it with your, like, having a mission and going for it, good stuff happens. But it's gonna take a little time, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I've been doing this been coaching since 2016, the start of 2016. And I feel like real traction developed for me, in like 2018, was when it began to feel very like stable. And then it kept going, and you have these like thresholds you hit, and they come in like almost 2-year increments, it feels like.
Yeah. I love it. Well, thank you so much. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so people can find me on Instagram, YouTube at Laura Norris Running, same handle on both. You can go to my website, lauranorrisrunning.com, and you can also tune in to the Tread Lightly podcast, which I co-host with Amanda Brooks of Run to the Finish. That's Tread Lightly on Apple and Spotify.
Love it. No, I appreciate you so much. I will get those linked in the show notes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. Stay in touch, and good luck with the rest of the winter out there.
Thank you. Same to you. It was an absolute pleasure to be on today.
Yeah, appreciate you. Peace.
Peace.